All right, so Daniel 8, 13 through 14, kinda. You know, we might go a little farther, but we'll definitely start out with those two, and we're going to discuss the demise of the little horn and the intertestamental years. Now, we're also going to do a little bit of deep dive. Have you guys ever heard of the Apocrypha? We're going to talk about the Apocrypha a little bit. We're going to read from the Apocrypha. We're going to talk about the pseudo-apocryphy as well. We're going to talk about a number of different things, going down through a rabbit hole, all to build up your knowledge of the biblical times that are coming about as God prepares the world for the arrival of Jesus Christ. So let's read first the little horn. This kind of talks about the result that will occur from all these things that are unfolding, and we'll deal with this as we walk through here. So I'd like the first reader to please read 8 through 11, please.
And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south, and toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. And it waxed great, even to the host of heaven. And it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself, even to the prince of the host. And by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down.
And of course, this little horn we discussed last time is Antiochus Iv Epiphanies, and he is one of the line of the Seleucid Empire, and we're going to talk about him in depth. And his movements are laid out here to the south, to the east, towards the pleasant land. He puffed himself up, waxed great. He even thought himself of the host of heaven, and cast down some of the hosts, which were the Jews at the time in the Holy Land, and the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. He made himself up, puffed himself up, even to where he's acting as if he was God on earth, the prince of the host. And he stopped the daily sacrifice, and we'll read on that, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Reading 12 through 14.
And the host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto the certain saint which spake, How long shall the vision concerning the daily sacrifice, and the transgression and desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot? And he said unto me, Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed.
Okay, so we're going to discuss all that. The host was given him against the daily sacrifice and by reason of transgression. So they sinned and cast out the truth to the ground, but it practiced and prospered. So the truth prospered despite this, and we'll see all this. And heard one saint speaking to another concerning this, the daily sacrifice, how long will it be taken away? And if you look on here, do the math with the 2,300 years, it's a little more than 7 years. So what does that mean? And we'll talk about that. Now, this is a unique period in time. It's called the Intertestamental Period, which means this is between the Old Testament dates and when the New Testament begins. There's a period of time that is not covered by biblical text. Now, there's all kinds of folks that try to cover up that period with different books. In fact, if you've never heard of the Apocrypha covers that period. And at one time, this was part of the Christian Bible, but it was taken out. And we're going to discuss why that is. And we're going to actually read from it. And then there's a whole bunch of books that did not get included in the Bible. And these were all considered by some people to be put in there, but these were not considered divine at all. These were just people that were writing at the time. And this is called the Pseudo-Apocrypha, and a lot of books were considered. But again, all Old Testament. So, we discussed previously 323 through 167 BC, those Hellenistic kingdoms. Those 4 kingdoms or more that resulted out of the Alexander the Great's demise. And when he died, the kings, of course, had to fight over to determine who is going to control this land. And as far as the Jews are concerned, the ones that influenced their life, the ones that controlled Jerusalem were the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. And they ruled over most of the Near East. They had the largest empires. And of course, with Alexander came the Hellenization. And the Hellens were another name for the Greeks of the conquered people. So there was a layer of Greek society over the ruling class, over the economic class, over the social atmosphere that was occurring in this region. And if you wanted to be part of their world, you would have to speak Greek, understand the Greeks, and deal with the Greek people. And they brought with them their culture. Because there became so many of the Jews that began speaking Greek, they reached a point where they had to have a Bible to read because they could no longer read Hebrew. So we're going to talk about the development of the Septuagint, which just means the 70 Old Testament Greek, when it was translation start, and that's where that Apocrypha comes from as well, and we'll discuss all that. And we'll move from there to where those Greeks had their own Bible that they could actually read. And when I say the Bible, that's just the Old Testament. Now, what books belong to that? Well, there's much debate. You had the strict Hebrews had a certain set, and then you had the Hellenized Jews started adding different books to there. So there's some dispute amongst the believers at the time, amongst the believing Jews on what to include. Then we move into a phase of anti-Hellenization in 166 to 142 BC. The Maccabees, whose name, the name of one son was the Hammer, so they were the Hammerers. Family led a revolt against Antiochus IV Epiphanies and earned Jewish freedom. Post-revolt victory, the rededication of the temple occurred, and that's the origin of the Jewish holiday Hanukkah. Forming of the Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes at this time also occurred during these early days. In 142 to 63 BC, the Hasmonean Jewish dynasty rules independently, and that's where the Maccabees, it's also called Maccabees or the Hasmoneans, came from. In 63 BC, the Romans came into the area and they began their rule over the Jewish people. It begins with a co-emperor with Caesar, a man named Pompey, who came in and conquered Israel, and he appoints puppet rulers over them. 37, and they were the ones that sided with him, and they were the more conservative ones, had won over at this time. 37 through 4 BC, you've heard of Herod the Great. That's when he rules, and he is an appointed person placed in there because of his relationship with Augustus Caesar. He becomes the king of the Jews, and he gets appointed that by the Roman Senate. 20 BC, the Second Temple is starting to be rebuilt, and 6 AD, King Herod dies, and the Roman Empire divides his kingdom into multiple parts. So all these things happen in this intertestamental period. If you didn't have history to look at, you wouldn't know what happened between Malachi, last chapter in the Old Testament, and when we start the Gospels. And the Gospels start, being put together in the 50-ish BC, or excuse me, AD, and then it continues on. But we have a bunch of rich writings that we can look from, and we'll discuss those today. All right, Now the Septuagint. Now, again, we have the Old Testament written in Hebrew and Aramaic. Those Aramaic pieces, as we discussed, are in the book of Daniel. The rest is in Hebrew. As stated, when Alexander the Great swept through and brought the Hellenistic culture with him, there was a sweep there of a period of 150 years where Greek culture was ruling over the Jews. And a lot of the people turned to Greek and only speaking Greek, so they could not read Hebrew. So what happened? They wanted a translation on their own. But it just didn't start there. When the Babylonians were defeated by Cyrus the Great, and the Jews moved back into the region, the former Holy Land, they started picking up bad habits as they mingled with the people. So here we saw, the Greek tongue at that time was getting diluted. So the Jews dispersed and they spoke a different tongue starting in about 455 BC. Nehemiah has this complaint to say. In Nehemiah 13:23 it says, "In those days also saw I Jews that had married wives of Ishad, of Ammon, and of Moab, and their children spoke half in the speak of Ishad, and could not speak the Jewish language, but according to the language of each people." It's going to be a topic we're going to discuss tonight, is assimilation. The culture that you're living within, the dominant culture, has an influence. Does today, doesn't it? Did back then. So it's no different. If you're not careful, you're going to be absorbed inside the culture that you are living in, the dominant culture. At the time that this is discussed, Aramaic was the common lingua franca, the common language of the people, of the Jews. So we have the Jewish people having to speak Jewish, Aramaic, and other languages, and they're going to have to pick up Greek, and they're going to have to pick up Latin. So we see this, that in this age, about 270-ish BC, the Greek Old Testament comes to being. It is translated from the Hebrew Bible and the Apocrypha into Koine Greek. It's the first Greek translation of the Old Testament there is. The translation is quoted in the New Testament. I think that's fascinating, particularly by Paul and also by the Greek church elders. So the people that spoke Greek at this time, and Paul spoke and he wrote in Greek, the whole New Testament is written in Greek. So what did they look at as reference? Well, they looked, a lot of them looked at the Septuagint. In fact, you could look at over 50 verses Paul took directly from Old Testament quotes in Greek, and he put them in the New Testament. Have you ever noticed when you read some of the Old Testament, it's close, but it doesn't quite sound the same, not the same words as it does in the New Testament? Have you ever seen that? Well, the reason being is when the English Bible translators translated, they translated from the Hebrew directly into English, and they translated from the Greek directly into English. So you had some disparity between those verses. Why? Paul was quoting, and others quoted from an Old Testament that was written in Greek. So it's kind of interesting to know these things as we look at the Bible, because the Bible, in its original, I always tell people, in its original text came directly from God. And then you get the argument, yeah, but we don't have the original text. Well, we're fairly close. We're fairly close. We know that the Old Testament that we have today, the Masoretic script was the one that was looked at. It went back to 900 AD. But with the Dead Sea Scrolls, we go back, 100 years, 200 years BC, and we know that the Old Testament texts that we have and that we look at today that our English language came from is 99.9% accurate to the time that Jesus walked the earth. So he was looking at an Old Testament in Hebrew that is exactly the same as they have today, or 99.6. I think that's pretty fascinating because it's the most preserved ancient document ever. Why? Well, it's a religious document. People take care when they translate things. I think it's interesting when you go back and look at the monks that sat there and they were copying this, because in the time of the monks, there wasn't any printing press. That one didn't come around until Gutenberg invented the printing press. So these guys would sit there with candles in the cold, in the wintertime, copying word by word. Sometimes they would find, the archaeologists would find a stack of parchment papers, all filled with scripture. And those were the ones that were thrown out, because when you sit there and write by hand, you're going to make a mistake. So somebody obviously had dadgummit, you missed this one over here, chunking. And that was expensive, because parchment is, stretched animal skin, and it's incised and shrunk, and it's a very expensive thing to do. So you don't want to make a mistake. So that monk probably went home, that night without his meal or something. I don't know what it was. But they'd find a whole stack of them, because, again, this is scripture, so you don't throw it away. You can't reuse it. So what do? Put it in a stack and let the Lord worry about it. I'm not destroying them and burning them. So it's kind of interesting to think about that. But anyway, we know that this particular version of the Septuagint was brought about by an Egyptian king, one of the Ptolemies, Ptolemy Philadelphus, who reigned 285 through 246, and he commissioned a translation of Hebrew for his library in Alexandria. So he had 70. This is where it gets into maybe a little bit of myth involved. There were 72 translators from Jerusalem who subsequently sent to an island of Pharos, which is Pharos Island is along the Nile. It's in the middle of the Nile, about 300 or 400 miles, and there's nothing out there but desert and cropland. And so he locked them in there, and they did the translation of the Torah into Greek. And it means 70, Septuagint means 70, but actually it was 72, if this tradition is correct. And this is where we get the LXX. So this was the original Greek Old Testament Bible, and it was translated by Saint Jerome, in 400 AD into Latin. And that became the Latin Vulgate Bible that lasted in Christendom as really the only Bible for 1,000 years, until we started rolling around with the printing press and different versions, Coverdale's and different versions of the Bible coming. So this is important, because it put the Greek Bible in the hands of the non-Hebrew readers. All right. If you want to learn more about the Septuagint, you can see the exact translation online, and I put a place here that you can go for that. Any questions on this so far? This is your religious heritage here, and you're getting all this. So this is interesting. Now let's go to the Apocrypha. Yes, sir.
Didn't archaeologists a couple of years back find the whole book of Isaiah?
Oh yeah, that was in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yeah.
If you go, they have these. It's the Museum of the Book, I think it's called. We've been there in Jerusalem, and the museum is shaped like the jars that they found the Dead Sea Scroll in. It kind of comes up like this and to a point. I'll bring a picture of it the next time. But you go in there, and they have that whole Isaiah scroll all rolled out, and you can walk around and see it. And you're looking at something, from before the time of Jesus Christ. And that's why you could say, that came down to us as a gift, and what a blessing that was. Because before that, all the doubters were going, well, that script only goes back to 900 AD. How much credence can you put on that? Boom, we go back 1,000 years beyond that. So there, you doubters, there's the word of God in the hands of Christ. And Jesus Christ himself said, that this is the word of God. Not one dot, not one tittle shall change until it's fulfilled. So he read from all those books, and they found fragments of every book in the Bible with the exception of Esther at that location. So that's pretty fascinating,
That's
isn't it?
amazing.
Yeah. I've got it's Dead Sea Scrolls, and there was some shepherd boy that was throwing rocks, probably bored, as boys do. They'll throw rocks at things. He threw it in a hole, and he heard. So he went and investigated, and that's the original find. And they've been all over the place since then. So it is what a gift it is for us to silence those critics of the Bible. Okay, now let's talk about this Apocrypha thing. When they did the Greek, and this came from the Greek side, not the Hebrew side. The Greek side of the church looked at these books as valid. Now, some of these were definitely written between that intertestamental period. Some of the books that are in here, and that's like Maccabees, that talks about this war we're going to discuss tonight, about this revolt against Antiochus IV Epiphanies. It's all documented firsthand here in this book. It's not included in our Bible, and we'll go through this. So you have the Apocrypha. It means hidden things, as opposed to apocryphal, which means when you say something's apocryphal, you're throwing it out and say it has no validity. Apocrypha just means hidden. And there are 14 books that were included in the Septuagint. And, I told you that Jerome wrote this book that was there for 1,000 years in Christendom. Well, it contained 14 of the books originally that were in this Greek Septuagint. And it was received by the early church, and everyone was looking at these books. They're not in your Bible now. Why is that? The Hebrews that were ardent Old Testament's got to be in Hebrew said, not written in Hebrew, not in our Old Testament Bible, so they dismissed these. But the early church kept this because it had some value in their mind's eye by some of the people. So that's called the canonization of the Bible. What is in the canon? What has been approved? And the Apocrypha met the early list. And there are several levels of acceptance in the Judeo-Christian community on these apocryphal works. You'll hear about Apocrypha. As far as the Protestants are concerned, Apocrypha is outside the Hebrew Bible canon, and we don't consider these divinely inspired, but we regard these as a worthy of study by the faithful. So there's good things in here, like we're going to read from it tonight, but I wanted you to know this is not the Bible, not inspired as far as we're concerned, but it's good in the terms of studying it for faith. Then I have the term pseudepigrapha. These are spurious works ostensibly written by a biblical figure. So you'll have one of them in here that's really messed a lot of people up. It's called the Book of Enoch. Now, who is Enoch, of course? Enoch was taken up by God, right? In the early portions of the Bible, it says, and Enoch walked with God. Most of the people were living about 800 years. He lived 350-ish, and the Lord took him up. Well, somebody's got a book that he wrote, so it's all dubious questions. Someone else wrote as if they were Enoch. And so those are the kind of books in here. Here's a number of them. The Apocalypse of Abraham, the Apocalypse of Adam, the Testament of Adam, Life of Adam and Eve. Let's see if I can see some other names that'll pop out here. The Apocalypse of Daniel, more Psalms of David, the Apocalypse of Elijah, Enoch 1, 2, and 3. And it goes on and on. People writing as if they were these people in the Bible. And then there's a whole other book that lists them all as well. Why do I have these? I wanted to kind of see what they were, and I can understand why they weren't included. Because these more are Hellenistic for some strange reason. They don't speak in the same fashion as the words are authoritative. And they were dismissed by the early church. So why should we have these and give them any credence? This is the source. This Book of Enoch is the one where definitively it says the angels had sexual relations with human beings, and they formed demons kind of creatures that are on earth. That I've dealt with people that are demon seed believers that think that is wholeheartedly true. And I say, where does that come from? That comes from the Bible. I said, it doesn't say that. And they go, yeah, but it's backed up by the Book of Enoch. Whoa, you just went extra biblical on me, and it was kicked out by the early church elders. Why should I give any credence to that now? So you have to kind of understand what gets people in trouble. Extra biblical books like these get people in trouble. Okay, so back to the Apocrypha. The Apocrypha books were retained in the Latin Vulgate Bible, like I said, written 400 AD by Jerome, while the Catholic affirmed 7 of these books as to be deuterocanonical, and these are works that are accepted by some canon but not by the others. So the Catholics accepted 7 of these books. Later on, at the Council of Trent, they affirm that there's 7 of these books that are to be accepted, and I'll have a list of those down here at the bottom, of which ones they accept into the 7. The Reformation Protestants considered all 14 books intertestamental. That's what we've began with, saying what's the intertestamental. So they're saying they were all in between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and they opted to put them in a separate part of the Bible in the back called the Apocrypha. And later on, it was considered non-canonical, and it was taken out by the Protestants. Puritans specifically did not like it because it was not in the Old Testament. And who had validity and who had control of adding these Apocrypha in there? And they did call them useful for instruction. So for the most part, the Protestants kicked all these out because they weren't in the Old Testament and they weren't canonical considered by the New Testament early church elders. Any questions so far? Okay, now these Apocrypha books here, I list them. First Ezra, Second Ezra, Tobit, Judith, additions to Esther, the Wisdom of Solomon, Ecclesiasticus, Barcus, Suzanne, the Song of the Three Children, Bel and the Dragon, which is added as the 13th and 14th chapter of Daniel, the Prayer of Manasseh, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, which are history books, and these in orange, the Catholics considered as divinely inspired. Now, why would they do that? Why would the Catholics go back and look at those books and say they're divinely inspired when the Protestants threw them out? Well, very interestingly, and this is all church history. I'm not dogging anybody. This is taken as the Catholic viewpoint, and these are the ones that are accepted. Now, this is the Catholic talking to us. So the Catholic point of view is these books are divinely inspired. Now, these are the 7, and belong in the canon of sacred scripture, which it is, according to them. It is in the current approved Catholic Bible. The doctrines have been declared from these books, such as, now get this, this is where you've got to be careful about what you say is divinely inspired, because from these books you get purgatory, prayers for the dead, indulgences, which, alms, which you can pay for forgiveness of sins, storing up of good deeds, which help pay for your salvation, acquiring grace to outweigh the evil deeds at the day of judgment, the rite of exorcism, using objects and prayers to expel Satan. In addition to that, this is where is used for the worship of, or the adoration of Mary. So that's also in these books. Non-Catholic, now this is coming from the Catholics again, non-Catholic denominations not using these books are deficient and do not have all the necessary means of salvation at their disposal. Protestants have removed these books and tampered with the Word of God. So, is it important what you include in the Bible? Absolutely. Look at the doctrinal shape that occurs when you add different books into the Bible. People use them to justify what they've come up with. Now, it's interesting that that this comes up and becomes critical inside the Catholic faith. All these things are elevated up in status to explain. And what do they have to do? They have to go back and find these in the Apocrypha. So, any thoughts on that? It's interesting, isn't it? You wonder why we have a difference. Well, when you use different holy books, guess what? So, if you want to read these, you can. But all the Protestants threw these out at Reformation. They were studying the Bible hard. They were looking at what the Bible said. They looked at what grace had and offered up, and they excluded these books. Now, we can go back and look at it again. I have read some of these, and I can see where you can get off base a little bit, because it does not have the focus that Paul puts on grace and John puts on grace. I mean, it's different. So anyway, you know what that is now. So when we get to the Apocrypha, know that we're reading it because it's history. And the history comes from eyewitnesses that saw what was going on. Okay, any questions?
So Joe, whenever they translated the Bible, they went from the Greek. Because you hear people talk about, let's go back to the Greek.
Well, in the New Testament, that is what you go back to, is the Greek.
Right.
In the Old Testament, what you go back to is the Hebrew.
Right.
Yeah.
My
And a little Aramaic.
What I was leading up to is that information included in any of those two that was used to translate the Bible that we have today?
Well, if you don't have the Apocrypha, you don't have to translate it. So that made that translation easy because you didn't have to do it. As far as the text we get, most of the translators use the oldest text they can get, or the oldest parchments or scriptures, pieces that they have, the fragments. And they piece it together, all these fragments, to try to get the oldest, because they think the oldest is the closest to what it should have been. That is not necessarily the case, because there are some heretical versions like we have now. We have what, the Queen James Bible is one of the versions that we have now. Now, if it was Queen James Bible, if sometime in the future someone found the Queen James Bible and it was the only other version they found was 2 years older and it was the King James Bible, would you throw out the King James Bible and go with the Queen James because it's 2 years older? No. You also have to look at who translated it, because people put into translations their biases. So you've got to be very careful. Now, the Alexandrian school, where there's I need to give a class on the creation of the Bible. I know the canon of the Bible and where it came from, and I've done that in the past, and I need to do it again. But there's a lot of subtleties in that you've got to be careful of in your translation. I can tell you this, the King James Version is a very, very, very good translation, and it came from the Textus Receptus, which is a translation into Greek of the Old and the New Testament, and we use it exclusively for the New Testament, and they looked at Textus Receptus, they looked at the Geneva Bible and a couple other translations to build up the King James. It's very good. The problem that they have with some of the modern translations, in my mind's eyes, is that it's built on the Textus Sinaiticus, and it's also built on the Textus Vaticus, which are supposedly older than the Textus Receptus was, and because of that, they say it's more valid, and I say that is wrong, because there's a school that twisted some of those translations. Anyway, King James, you're good to go. Use it as the basis for studying if you're getting down into the Greek. If there's anything fuzzy that you don't know about, we need to get together and talk in a group and make sure. Because the Bible cannot be broken. It is the Word of God. It's just some people break it intentionally. Some people do it out of ignorance. So we've got to be careful of the word that we receive. Okay, anything else? All right, now I'd like to move into something called the clash of cultures. Alexander, his conquering armies brought with them the Hellenistic culture. We said that over and over, which thrust the new world philosophy upon these people that they conquered, especially when we're considering the devout Jews. And we're going to get into looking at how they viewed the world and just the amazing change that this represented. A disastrous one. However, this is nothing new, for this clash of culture predates the flood, and we live amidst this clash of culture today. You think we're in a clash of culture today? Oh, yeah. Yeah, there is a different philosophy being thrust upon us in our children in schools, in entertainment, in our government. All those things are happening, and we can see those. It's no different back then. This is as old as human nature. The original clash of culture occurred between the sons of God and the sons of Cain, those who turned their back on God. That's a term I'm using, and was first played out in Genesis chapter 6, where only Noah and his family successfully separated themselves from the corrupting evil of Satan's world culture that he was thrusting upon everyone. Why do we know that it was Satan's culture? Because in Genesis 6:5 it says, "And God saw the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every imagination of thoughts of his heart was only evil continuously." Now that's an amazing statement if you think about it. There was no light in these people's hearts at all. They were completely separated and living in darkness. So much so that many of them just took that as the acceptable norm, and they thought that's the way everyone lived. In fact, if you're born into an environment like this, there's really no hope for you to ever see the light. And you would never even think of calling on the name of the Lord, because you had been corrupted since youth. So God purged the earth with water during the great flood. Now why would God do this? In Genesis 6:3, Moses tells us that God said, "My spirit shall not always strive with man." And these two words translate from the Hebrew, "shall not always" and "strive." And this is fascinating, and I've discussed this before, but we need to bring this up and think about this every once in a while. These Hebrew origins of these words. "Shall not always," the Hebrew word olam. It's a vanishing point. Generally time out of the mind, like over the horizon. You can't see the future. You cannot see anything past that vanishing point. And the word strive, it's a Hebrew word din, or din, and it's a straight course, a sailing, like you're going to sail to a point on the horizon in a straight line. So when you combine these two together, these words provide a germane point on what we're talking about tonight. There is a vanishing point to the straight course God's Spirit will provide. At some point, you will reach beyond a point where you will never face God. You'll always have your back turned upon God. And mankind can reach that point, and each soul can reach that point if they never turn towards God. And again, it says here, "My spirit shall not always strive with man." Why? Because man has turned their back on God. Anyway, back to my point, if I can. Everyone good or good enough at this point? Anyway, mankind can reach a point where God, it says, "Okay, you're going your own way. I'm going to let you go your own way. I can see the end from the beginning. I know you'll never turn back towards me. I just know it's not going to happen. You have reached a point where you will not be saved. You will not call on my name." And God knows that, and he honors that. If that's what you want, that's what you'll get. Okay, in Deuteronomy 7:9, God further tells Israel, there were 7 nations greater and mightier than thou. And in Deuteronomy 27, God then commands Israel to utterly destroy these nations. And this seems harsh, but again, we're talking cultures here. "But thou shalt utterly destroy them, namely the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, as the Lord thy God hath commanded thee." Wow, that's harsh. That's every man and woman and child, everybody in that culture. God tells them they will be destroyed. Why did God command Israel to utterly destroy these nations? It was judgment that God wanted enacted upon these nations. These vile nations had institutionalized every abomination rebelling against God nature and his will for mankind. Read the list of abominations in Leviticus 8 through 18, and it's got everything in there you could imagine. Every vile thing, sexual acts, everything. Go and read it, which God specifically forbids. And then realize is that there's always a culture on earth that becomes part of their culture that they have accepted. It's strange, but these evil practices became so institutionalized, there was no hope within that society to ever come out of that, because their children were polluted from birth to see these vile things and accept them as normal. Okay, any questions? Interesting stuff. Okay, in Leviticus, Moses provides God's full reason behind his destruction judgments against these nations. God had seen all this before during that pre-flood period as it formed up and as it grew. And like in Genesis 6:5, the wickedness of these nations was great, and every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Now, I'd like for someone to help me read here. If someone could read Leviticus. And again, we're thinking about cultures and the clash of cultures. And we have here a clash between the people that have been roaming around in the desert for 40 years. God was honing them, cleaning out those people that rebelled against him, getting them ready for going into the promised land to do battle with these people. And this is why he told them it must be cleansed. So if I can have somebody read 24 all the way down to 28. So don't read 28, just read 24 through 27, please.
Defile not yourselves in any of these things, for in all these the nations are defiled, which I cast out before you. And the land is defiled, and therefore I do visit the iniquity thereof upon it, and the land itself vomits out her inhabitants. Ye shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, and shall not commit any of these abominations, neither any of your own nation, nor any stranger that sojourn among you. For all these abominations have the men of the land done, which were before you, and the land is defiled.
And see that again? All the abominations that I've been telling you not to do, these guys are doing. So let's read 28 through 30.
That the land spew not you out also when ye defile it, as it spewed out the nations that were before you. For whosoever shall commit any of these abominations, even the souls that commit them shall be cut off from among their people. Therefore shall ye keep my ordinance. Yet that ye commit not any one of these abominable customs which were committed before you, and that ye defile not yourselves therein. I am the Lord your God.
Abominable customs. That is what is accepted within the society as a cultural norm. Not only, you go back there and read Leviticus, and it's a vile list. Read that and look at it. That is what they practiced routinely, including killing their own children before the altars of Baal. You know, 18, 1 through 18. You know, so, yeah, it's a heck of a list. And it's scary to consider that those were practices that were done by those cultures to the point God wanted them completely wiped out. Just like he completely wiped out in the pre-flood era everybody but Noah and his family. All right. Now, things have not changed. Here is what was written right after Christ was raised up into heaven and ascended to God the Father Almighty. He left these thoughts with John and with Paul and with James. So let's read these and thinking about this clash of culture. And this was going on right after the time Christ was resurrected. So someone read the 1 John up here.
Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world passeth away, and the lust thereof. But he that doeth the will of God abideth forever.
Amen. And let's read Romans 12:2. Notice the theme.
And do not conform to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God.
Followed by James 4:4.
Ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that the friendship of the world is enmity with God? Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God.
So what to do? I put this at the end. This is all worldly stuff. And this is what we shouldn't be doing. So what should we be doing as Christians?
Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue, and if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things.
And that one I have right by my desk. Thank you, Joanna. She gave me a little black thing that I have on there. Because it's easy to get wrapped up in all this flesh the world offers up. Constantly pushing and bearing down on you. Because who does the world belong to? So Satan is presenting his culture to you all the time. Because the world is his. Now, notice these words are all 2,000-ish years old. Notice what we just read from Leviticus at the time of Moses. Same issues, right? They're dealing with the same issues of these cultures. And I'll send all these slides out to everybody. So you'll get these all. So if you've got these, I'll move on. Everybody good? All right. Now, assimilation versus forced conversion. Throughout history, there are innumerable instances where the corrupting influence of the world are thrust upon those who have a faith relationship with God. In this era, it came to the forefront. I'm talking about this Hellenistic era that the Jews were living in. And we're going to look at this kind of in depth here because it's critical to understand how this works. From the person that's going to write this is looking back at this time as a historian, secular one, and examining what's going on at the time. So it's going to be fascinating. We're going to compare that, this assimilation that occurs slow. In 539 BC, under Cyrus the Great's decree, the Babylonian captivity ended as the first group of Jews returned to the Promised Land and worshiped Jehovah. Alexander the Great honored their right to worship, as did the Ptolemaic and Seleucid kings, except for the last one, and that's Antiochus Iv Epiphanies. During this time, the Jews endured centuries of living under the eroding and corrupting influences of the seductive Hellenistic culture. It was a slow cancer that ate away at Jewish tradition as they were lost or they compromised their faith and became Hellenistic Jews. And that's a term that's used at this time. Hellenized Jews and then traditional Jews. It caused this internal and bitter division amongst those Jews. It's interesting today when you look at the Christian church, we have the same thing going on. We have churches that compromise with what the social norms of the day are. And they've departed from the Bible, God's text. And what are they doing? They're applying into their lives this modern culture. It was Hellenistic at the time. I don't know what we call it now. Secular society, whatever you want to call it, the acceptable norm. They've changed it, but whatever's acceptable in the world is counter to what God wants in our lives. And it says it right here. We just read that. What do we choose in our lives? Now here we're going to see something, what I call assimilation, the slow beating down and taking over our children's lives, in educating them that what is the acceptable norm. And you change and change in time to come from a more conservative view into a more worldly view. A biblical view to a worldly view is what occurs here. And the door slams in 187, it's 167, BC, Antiochus Iv Epiphanies, is one of Satan's vile Antichrist. And that's the only way you can look at this, if you read the Bible, is to understand this is Satan's man doing Satan's job to wipe out the Jews. Now, it's been tried over and over throughout history. It's going to be tried again by Satan here this time. He is going to force the Jews to either worship the Greek gods or be killed. That is his desire, and that's satanic. Now, can everyone read this? Is that tough? I'll go ahead and read some of this if you can't. Joanna, can you read some of this? All right. Now, what this is, I'm showing you the gradual, what the Jews believed and how it was gradually taken away from them by this Hellenistic culture that surrounded them. So I want you to get this feel of assimilation, because that is what the goal is for a number of cultures that come in. We did the same thing. The United States did. We went and we conquered the Indians and assimilated them. We converted all of them. We took away their traditions. The United States did it. Most of the cultures did it. Russians did it when they took over their empire. The Brits did it. The whole Christian church was spreading the gospel throughout the world. Now, they didn't force it on them unless you're conquistadors that came in with a priest afterwards, and they converted mandatorily, got and burned all the texts and everything of that they could find of the former religion, and because it was pagan and heathen. So this isn't just something that happened at this time. This happens over and over again. And this also happens between the Catholics and the Protestants. They had a 30 years war in which they were fighting together on who had the predominant religion. It's hard to put up with someone that tells you you're a heretic because of your beliefs. Like it's hard to fight against the Hindus because they said, we talked to them, they're like, oh yes, Jesus is one of many gods. How do you deal with that? They're not going to go radical on you. But if someone is, like we looked at the Catholic faith, this was something that was fought over to the death on a number of things. And when they looked at all these indulgences and that sort of thing and papal control, those were fighting words to the death for, during the Protestant Reformation period. All right, so let's read this. Joanna, if you would read, if you could read this whole thing, I would really appreciate it.
Sure. The basis of Judaism was religion. The idea of surveillance and upholding deity entered into every phase and moment of Jewish life. Morals and manners were ordained by the Jerusalem.
And that's just ruled by a bunch of old men, is what that word means.
In strictness and detail. Entertainment and
I had to look it up too.
Entertainment and games were few and restrained. Intermarriage with non-Jews was forbidden, so were celibacy and infanticide.
And those were totally accepted. You were allowed to kill your children in most of these cultures. If they were born a girl and you wanted a boy, that was very common. That was very common. They'd just leave them out to the elements to die. Or if there was any birth defect, they would leave them out to the elements to die. Very common. Celibacy, the Jews would not allow anybody to be unmarried in their culture. That was just unheard of. So go ahead, Joanna.
Hence the Jews bred abundantly and reared all their children. Despite war and famine, their numbers grew throughout iniquity, and until the time of Caesar, there were some 7 million Jews in the Roman Empire. The bulk of the population before the Maccabean era was agriculture. The Jews were not yet a nation of traders, even as late as the 1st century AD. Josephus wrote, "We are not a commercial people. The great trading peoples of the age were the Phoenicians, the Arabs, and the Greeks. Slavery existed in Judea as elsewhere, but the class war was relatively mild. Art was undeveloped, only music flourished. The flute, the drum, the cymbal, the ram's horn or trumpet, the lyre, and the harp were used to accompany the single voice. The folk song or the solemn religious antiphons. Jewish religion scorned the concessions of Greek ritual to popular imaginations. It would have nothing to do with images, oracles, or birds and trails. It was less anthropomorphic and superstitious, less colorful and joyful than the religion of the Greeks. Face to face with the naive
Polytheism
of Hellenic cults and rabbis chanted the Saronos refrain still heard in every Jewish synagogue. Shamanai Israel Adonai Inu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one.
All right, so you had the very even-paced religion of the Jews. They had a society and built a society. They did not have any wild singers. Everything was devoted to God. You woke up thinking about God. You went to sleep thinking about God. You thought about God during your week. You went to your synagogue. You studied the Torah. So your life was set and it was controlled. You did everything inside the faith in the Jewish community. It was separated, or it was supposed to be. Now, let's look at what slowly happens. Into this simple and Puritan life, the invading Greeks brought all the distractions and temptations of a refined and Epicurean civilization. Now, when they say Epicurean, that means seeking pleasure in life. It doesn't mean complete hedonism. It means you live life for your pleasure, for seeking pleasure as to avoid pain. So you did what felt good and you enjoyed your life. Around Judea was a ring of Greek settlements and cities: Samaria, Neapolis, Gaza, Ashkelon, Azotus, Joppa, Apollonia, Doris, Syncrinia, Polis, and Acco. These are called the Decapolis cities. Just across the Jordan was a lead Decapolis of Greek cities: Damascus, Gardia, Gesra, Duum, Philadelphia, Pella, Raphia, Hippo, Synthopolis, and Canath. Each of these had Greek institutions and establishments, temples of Greek gods and goddesses, schools and academies, gymnasium, palaestrums, and nude games. Now, that's one thing we don't have now, but in the Greek era, it was only men going there and everyone competed in the nude. So that was totally unusual for the Jews were concerned. From such cities and from Alexandria, Antioch, Delos, and Rhodes, Greeks and Jews came to Jerusalem, bringing the infection of Hellenistic, devoted to science and philosophy, art and literature, beauty and pleasure, song and dance, drinking and feasting, athletics and courtesans, female prostitutes, high-level ones, and handsome boys, homosexuality rampant in these societies, along with the gay, and that means when this was written, happy, sophistication that questioned all morals, and an urban skepticism that undermined all supernatural belief. They doubted God's existence, and these people discussed it openly. How the Jewish youth resist such invitations to delight, this easy liberation from the 1,000 irksome restraints. Now again, the Jewish life was regimented. They had laws that controlled all aspects of their lives as if God was watching them at every moment, and He is. But they were wanting to be freed from that, freed from the law. And so did Paul, by the way. He wanted to be free from the law as well, interestingly enough. And that's what Jesus Christ brought. But the Jews at this time were law-abiding, and their lives were constrained and dictated by law. Young wits amongst the Jews began to laugh at the priests as money grubbers and at their pious followers as fools who allowed old age to come upon them without even ever testing the pleasures, luxuries, and subtleties of life. Rich Jews were also won over by Hellenism, for they could afford to yield to temptation. When you got money, you can afford a little more. Jews who sought appointment from Greek officials felt it the part of the policy to speak Greek language and to live the Greek way, even to say a few kind words to the Greek gods. So here is this slow churning of the Jewish people and these temptations that were all around them in the society that they lived. And it was two totally different atmospheres, two different cultures, and they were clashing. Some of the people never submitted to this at all, but others became Hellenistic Jews. So we see similar patterns all throughout history as we look at this. And we see that pattern today, as we have discussed. Now, I'm going to read, or we can read this, this is the Apocrypha. This is the history of the time. So we read how the slow Hellenization process took over. Now we're going to read, and you probably never read from the Apocrypha before, have you? We're going to read this, and it's a book of history. Again, it's an eyewitness of what occurred at this time. And some of this gets very nasty on what you're reading. Now, if you're a historian, they usually throw these books out because they have a religious tint to them. We're not going to do that because this, again, we are okay to read this, and it was part of the Bible originally. We just don't think it's divinely inspired. And in this case, we're reading history, so that's fine. This is the eyewitness account of the little horn, Antiochus Iv Epiphanies, and it's vile to read. And one of the reasons we're reading it, because the Antichrist will do similarly in the tribulation period in terms of taking away rights and imposing things upon us. So if you'll indulge me, let's go ahead and read these. I've broken them down in chunks. If someone would read chapter 1, 16 through 19 of this period of time. Are you up?
Okay. Now when the kingdom was established before Antiochus, he thought to reign over Egypt that he might have the dominion of 2 realms. Wherefore he entered into Egypt with a great multitude of chariots and elephants and horsemen and a great navy, and made war against the Ptolemy king of Egypt. But Ptolemy was afraid of him and fled, and many were wounded to death. Thus they got the strong cities in the land of Egypt, and he took the spoils thereof.
Okay, so when this happened, Rome wanted the balance of power, and that's why he was forced to leave. He didn't leave on his own accord. Rome said, you're going to leave. And they put Ptolemy back in here. So that's a little piece of history in there that's not included in this. Someone read 20 through 24, please. Antiochus.
Had smitten Egypt. He returned again in the 143rd year, and went up against Israel and Jerusalem with a great multitude, and entered proudly into the sanctuary, and took away the golden altar, and the candlestick of light, and the vessels thereof, and the table of the shewbread, and the pouring vessels, and the vials, and the censers of gold, and the veil, and the crown, and the golden ornaments that were before the temple, all which he pulled off. He also took the silver and the gold, and the precious vessels. He also took the hidden treasures which he found, and when he had taken all away, he went into his own land, having made a great massacre, and spoke very proudly.
Okay, so here we have Antiochus Iv Epiphanies. And, the Romans wouldn't let him stay there. The Ptolemies took all their riches with them. He thought he was going to go there, wipe out the army, and get all their riches and gold. He didn't get anything. So he didn't have any money. He was flat broke. He came back up and he raided the temple and took everything in it that he could turn into money. So he robbed the temple, and he, at this time, that is what is instructed or presented to us here. And again, this is Eyewitness account at the time. So 25 through 28.
Therefore there was a great mourning in Israel, in every place they were, so that the princes and elders mourned, the virgin and young men were made feeble, and the beauty of women was changed. Every bridegroom took up lamentation, and she that sat in the marriage chamber was in heaviness. The land also was moved for the inhabitants thereof, and all the house of Jacob was covered with confusion.
Okay, so Jacob is another name for Israel, of course. So all the tribes that were there were mourning because they had stripped their holy place. They had taken every bit of place to worship. It was as if somebody came in here, and this was our only place to worship in the entire county within a drive, and they wiped out everything in here. Took all the benches, took everything, nothing left but a hollow shell. But this is the only place that they could worship God, and it was desecrated by this man, Antiochus Epiphanes IV. But it's going to get worse. Someone read from 29 down to the gold word "then," and then the next person can pick up there.
And after 2 years fully expired, the king sent his chief collector of tribute unto the cities of Judah, who came unto Jerusalem with a great multitude, and spoke peaceable words unto them. But all was deceit. For when they had given him treatments, he fell suddenly upon the city, and smote it very sore, and destroyed much people of Israel. And when he had taken the spoils of the city, he set it on fire, and pulled down the houses and walls thereof on every side. But the women and children took they captive, and possessed the cattle.
So they took the women and children as slaves of the one. They came in and did that. Pretty nasty. They took all their earthly possessions. Nasty individual. Now, of course, if you read some of the history, he wasn't that bad. These are the people. The Bible, we read those verses earlier from Daniel. This is prophetic fulfillment right here that occurred. So the Bible prophesied it, and here it is fulfillment that occurs that we can see. Reading from then, please.
Then builded they the city of David with a great and strong wall, and with mighty towers, and made it a stronghold for them. And they put therein a sinful nation, wicked men, and fortified themselves therein. They stored it also with armor and victuals, and when they had gathered together the spoils of Jerusalem, they laid them up there, and so they became a sore snare. For it was a place to lie and wait while the sanctuary and an evil act to say to Israel.
So Jerusalem was wiped out. Everybody was taken that was there and sold into slavery. And they were taking over Jerusalem, their capital city. How'd you like it if they take over Fayetteville and took everything there? Well, there's not much to take. But anyway, that was the heart of their nation. That was the soul of their nation. And Antiochus Epiphanes IV came back later and just decimated it and rebuilt upon it. So Jerusalem was again violated. 37 through 40, please.
Thus they shed innocent blood on every side of the sanctuary, and defiled it, inasmuch that the inhabitants of Jerusalem fled because of them. Whereupon the city was made a habitation of strangers, and became strange to those that were born in her. And her own children left her. Her sanctuary was laid waste like a wilderness. Her feasts were turned into mourning, her Sabbaths into reproach, her honor into contempt. As had been her glory, so was her dishonor increased, and her excellency was turned into mourning.
Pretty rough stuff, huh? It's going to get worse. Next reader, go 40 down to the word and, or 41 to the word and, please.
Moreover, King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people, and everyone should leave his laws, so that all heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king. Yea, many also of the Israelites consented to his religion, and sacrificed unto idols, and profaned the Sabbath. For the king had sent letters by messengers unto Jerusalem, and the cities of Judah, that they would follow the strange laws of the land, and forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice, and drink offerings in the temple, and that they should profane the Sabbaths and festival days.
Wow, I mean, it's taking their whole religion
Culture.
away from them. Their culture, they're wiping it out. He is wiping out their culture completely. It's going to get worse. Next reader.
And pollute the sanctuaries and holy people, set up altars and groves and chapels of idols, and sacrifice swine flesh and unclean beasts, that they should also leave their children uncircumcised, and make their souls abominable with all manner of uncleanness and profanation, to the end they might forget the law and change all the ordinances. And whosoever would not do according to the commandment of the king, he said, he should die.
There you go. Convert or die. Where does that sound
We'll see
familiar?
that later.
Yeah, that's the Antichrist. Take the mark of the beast or you die. So again, this is Satan's man for this hour to try to wipe out the Jews. It's pretty amazing when you consider it gets to this level where you're wiping out everything culturally the people stood for. We read earlier from Deuteronomy and Moses talking about wiping out these vile people. Now those vile people are wiping you out. What had happened to God here? Where was God? What was the lesson we're supposed to take from this? And this is the last one, I promise. I'll read the last section because let's continue. This is good stuff, I think. 51 through 53, please.
In the selfsame manner wrote he to his whole kingdom, and appointed overseers over all the people, commanding the cities of Judah to sacrifice city by city. And then many of the people gathered unto them, to wit, every one that forsook the law. And so they committed evils in the land, and drove the Israelites into secret places, even wheresoever they could flee forsook.
So if you were a righteous Jew, if you believed in the Torah, believed in the Word of God given to you, you fled. And you were living up in the mountains, in the rocks. Because in the cities they put overseers. And everybody that stayed in the city to get food, to get, whatever health care, education. All those things were controlled by Antiochus IV Epiphanies. Sounds similar to what we're going to see when the Antichrist comes and no one can sell or trade without the mark of the beast. So here the beast is living amongst them, demanding that they, worship. And it says here to sacrifice. They're sacrificing to the Greek god, Jupiter. They're sacrificing to the Greek gods. Wow. How many times in the Bible does it say, do not worship idols? I am the Lord thy God. So here at 54 through 64, let's read the next person down to read to the word now.
Now the 15th day of the month Caslu, in the 145th year, they set up the abomination of desolation upon the altar and built idol altars throughout the cities of Judah on every side, and burnt incense at the doors of their houses and in the streets. And when they had rented in pieces the books of the law which they had found, they burnt them with fire. And whosoever was found with any of the book of the Testament, and if any committed to the law, the king's commandment was that they should be put him to death. Thus did they, by their authority, unto the Israelites every month, to as many as were found in the cities.
All right, now here it just keeps getting worse. Next person finish us off there, please.
Now the 25th day of the month, they did sacrifice upon the idol altar, which was upon the altar of God. At which time, according to the commandment, they put to death certain women that had caused their children to be circumcised. And they hung the infants about their necks, and rifled their houses, and slew them that had circumcised them. Howbeit, many in Israel were fully resolved and confirmed in themselves not to eat any unclean thing.
very great.
very great wrath upon Israel.
Wow. Now, isn't that interesting to read? Now, this is a nation under attack by this vile creature of Satan trying to wipe out their culture. This is a cultural clash. Hellenism in its worst form under this king trying to destroy the children of God. Very sad. Now, obviously they didn't succeed because there were some of them that were resolved not to fall to prey to this evil man. And that's what we'll see next week in the coolest graphic I've made in a long time. So we'll just pick this up next time. This is the reaction, and this is why the Jews became free again. Because if you had to live under that oppression, what would you do?